People across the North whispered that the world had gone mad when the idea first surfaced. Robb Stark, king in the North, agreeing to a political marriage pact with Sansa Stark, his own sister. No one truly believed the rumors at first. Northerners were stubborn, proud, and fiercely protective of their honor. They knew the laws of old, and they knew the difference between tradition and desperation. But after the Red Wedding had nearly shattered the Norse faith in alliances, after Winterfell had fallen to the Boltons, and after the Lannisters had seized the capital with Sansa still trapped there, the realm had become a place where even unthinkable ideas found a way to breathe. It began quietly during the long nights at Riverrun. Robb had lost men to betrayal, to politics, to foolish trust. The phrase had humiliated him. The Lannisters mocked him, and even some northern houses questioned whether the young wolf truly understood the world he was trying to rule. Every victory he earned on the battlefield seemed to turn into a loss at the negotiation table. The war was slipping from his hands. His mother knew it, his bannermen knew it, Robb knew it most of all. Sansa was still kept like a bird in a cage in King's Landing, used as a political piece by the Lannisters. Her name was a tool, her face a shield, her future a threat. And somewhere between the cold stone walls of Riverrun and the cold iron thrones of the South, a dangerous idea found its way into the council's discussions. It was Roose Bolton's betrayal that changed everything. His secret rise in power, his new ties with the Lannisters, and the North's disunity pushed Robb into a corner so tight he couldn't see a clean way out. Catelyn knew that Walder Frey's insult had cost them dearly. She feared worse was still coming. Every raven brought more dark news. Every whisper carried more warnings. One night during a late council meeting, old Lord Karstark, drunk on bitterness and fury, made a harsh remark. "The Lannisters have your sister. They use her name against us. They use her claim to Winterfell, and we do nothing but bleed. If she were bound to our king, even in name, no one could use her against us." The room fell silent. Every bannerman stared at him with a mix of disgust and curiosity. Catelyn's face went pale with anger. Robb's jaw tightened, even suggesting the idea was an insult to the Stark's honor. But Karstark's words stayed in the air like smoke. Ugly, shameful, but impossible to ignore. Later, Robb sat alone in the map room, the candlelight flickering over the carved rivers and mountains. He did not want to think of it. It felt wrong. It felt desperate. But war had pushed him to the edge of choices no honorable man should ever face. He thought of his father, dead in a cold dungeon in King's Landing. He thought of Sansa, trapped, frightened, forced to play Lannister games alone. He thought of the North losing faith in him, house by house, betrayal by betrayal. It was not a marriage anyone would recognize. No union of two lovers, no joining of houses. It would be political, symbolic, a brutal message to the realm. The Starks were untouchable, even by the Lannisters. Any claim to Sansa would be invalid. Any attempt to force her into marriage or use her bloodline would be treason against the North. But even symbolic alliances had power, and the Lannisters understood symbolism better than anyone. Catelyn found Robb brooding over the map the next morning. She knew that look. It reminded her of Eddard when he was forced to choose between honor and survival. "You're thinking of that horrible suggestion," she said quietly. "It's not what he meant," Robb replied, but even he didn't sound convinced. "You will destroy the last piece of our family's honor if you do this." "They already destroyed it," Robb said. "Father was murdered. Bran and Rickon are believed dead. Arya is missing. You are taken prisoner, then freed, and I lose half the phrase for it. Sansa is in their hands. They have used us like pawns from the moment this war began." Catelyn's voice trembled. "Sansa is your sister. And the Lannisters are using her claim, her name, her future. If we do nothing, they'll marry her to someone loyal to them, and the North will be stolen from inside our own blood." He hated the idea. He hated the sound of it, the weight of it, the shame of it. But more than anything, he hated that war had left him with choices like this. At that moment, Robb Stark, king in the North, realized something. Honor could not win this war. And for the first time, he whispered a thought he would never dare speak aloud. If I must choose between honor and saving the North, then honor must bleed. Rumors travel faster than ravens in wartime, and it didn't take long for Robb's private doubts to reach the ears of men who were hungry for something, anything, that could shift the balance of the war. The northern camp was restless. Every defeat, every betrayal, every uncertain march had eaten away at morale. Men who had once shouted, "King in the North," with pride now whispered among themselves at night, questioning whether Robb still knew where he was leading them. But the rumor of a symbolic alliance between Robb and Sansa struck them like cold water. Not because they believed Robb capable of something dishonorable, but because war had already twisted everything they thought they understood about the world. They had seen worse in the South. They had seen men betray fathers, mothers, and children for a handful of gold. They had watched the Freys turn weddings into funeral pyres. They had seen the Lannisters pay singers to rewrite the truth. To many soldiers, this new idea was just another grotesque consequence of a war that had dragged on too long. In the war tent, the major bannermen gathered, some uneasy, some indifferent, some strangely intrigued. Robb stood before them, shoulders heavy, face tired. He had fought more battles in his heart in the last week than in all the fields of the Riverlands. "This is not a real marriage," Robb began, his voice steady but cold. "Not a coupling, not a joining of blood. It is a political declaration, a shield for Sansa, a blow against the Lannisters and their schemes." Lord Umber crossed his arms. "And the North will accept this?" "The North will accept that we protect our own," Robb replied sharply. Catelyn stood beside him, hands clasped tightly. She hated every second of this discussion, but she understood the weight of it. She had watched kings fall because they hesitated too long. She had watched men die for honor, and she had watched her husband executed because he refused to play the game. But seeing her children forced into that same gruesome game twisted her heart in ways she could barely hide. "King Robb speaks truth," she said reluctantly. "This union is a wall, not a wedding, a claim, not a bond. It keeps Sansa out of Lannister hands in every legal sense that matters. If they try to force her into another match, they'll be declaring war not only on us, but on every law of the realm." Karstark lifted his head. "The Lannisters don't care about laws." "No," Robb answered, "but they care about appearances. They care about power. They care about how the realm sees them. Cersei thrives on control. This takes control from her." A murmur spread through the tent. Then Lord Manderley spoke up, his voice deep and careful. "If this symbolic pact is announced, the realm will react. The South will call it madness. The Iron Throne will call it treason. The Tullys may feel shame. The Freys will feel insulted. The Boltons," he paused, "the Boltons may see opportunity." Robb's eyes darkened at the name. "The Boltons see opportunity everywhere," he muttered. Rose Bolton had been too quiet, too calculated, too patient. Robb now felt that man's cold gaze even when he wasn't present, and the idea that Bolton might use Sansa against him made Robb's stomach twist. "Better for Sansa to be under my protection," Robb said, "than under the Lannisters, or, gods forbid, the Boltons." The council fell into a long, heavy silence. War had a way of stripping morality until only survival remained. And in that moment, every man in the tent saw something they didn't want to admit. The Starks had been pushed into a corner so tight that even unthinkable decisions felt like strategy. When the meeting ended, Robb remained alone. The tent felt smaller than ever. The weight of the crown felt heavier. He pressed his palms on the war table and stared at the carved direwolf sigil burned into the wood. He didn't want this. He didn't want any of it. The war had stolen his father, scattered his siblings, drowned the North in blood, and now it demanded he sacrifice even the idea of family in a symbolic gesture that tasted like shame. Catelyn stood quietly at the entrance. She watched her son struggle, watched the boy she had raised turn into a king no one had prepared him to be. "Robb," she whispered, "you are not dishonoring your sister. You are saving her." He didn't look up. "And what if the realm sees it differently?" Catelyn's eyes softened with a painful truth. "The realm is already blind. Let them see what they want. We know what we fight for." Robb took a deep breath, the kind that hurt his chest. Then slowly he nodded. We will send a raven to the north, he said. A declaration, not of marriage, but of claim. Sansa Stark is under my protection, bound by pact and blood. No lord, no king, no Lannister may take her hand without war. The words felt like iron, heavy, cold, unbreakable. It was done. Whether the realm approved or not, the young wolf had made his choice. And somewhere in King's Landing, though she would not learn it for days, Sansa Stark's fate had just changed forever. The raven carrying Robb's declaration flew through storms and cold winds, its wings beating against the night sky as if it carried a secret too heavy for any creature to bear. And while the North began whispering about this binding pact, the news would not reach King's Landing for several days. But even before the letter arrived, something strange had begun happening in the Red Keep. Sansa Stark had noticed the shift first. It started with whispers behind her as she walked through the halls. Quiet, sharp conversations that ended abruptly whenever she passed. The Lannister servants, who usually greeted her with shallow courtesy, now avoided eye contact. Even Cersei's disgusted smirks had turned colder, more calculating. Sansa felt watched in a way she had never been before. Not as a pawn, not as a hostage, but as though someone feared she might slip out of their grip. And Cersei Lannister disliked losing control more than anything. That morning, Sansa had been summoned to the Queen Regent's chambers. She entered carefully, her steps soft, her hands folded to hide the tremble she couldn't control. Cersei stood near the window, staring out at the city with a look that made Sansa's stomach twist. "You're quiet today," Cersei said without turning. I did not know I was expected to speak, Your Grace." "Oh, Sansa, you are always expected to speak, even when you say nothing." Cersei finally turned, her eyes glinting like a blade. "Tell me, do you know what your brother is doing in the north?" Sansa swallowed. "I haven't heard from him in months." Cersei studied her face, searching for cracks. "He is desperate, and desperate men do foolish things." Sansa felt her heart beat faster. "What has he done?" "Nothing," Cersei replied casually. "Not yet, but I hear whispers." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "Whispers about alliances, whispers about claims, whispers suggesting he might attempt something reckless to protect you." Sansa froze. "Robb wouldn't, would he?" Cersei smiled at her reaction, a cruel, triumphant smile. "If your brother thinks he can use your name to undermine the Iron Throne, he is more naive than I thought." The words echoed in Sansa's mind long after she was dismissed. Meanwhile, back in the north, reactions to Robb's declaration spread like wildfire. The houses loyal to Stark blood stood firm. They understood the difference between a political shield and an actual marriage. They understood the cruelty of Southern politics and the danger Sansa was in. Many believed Robb's symbolic binding was the smartest thing he had done since the war began, but not everyone took it well. In the dim halls of the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton read the Raven's letter with a cold, thoughtful gaze. His pale eyes lingered on Robb's declaration for a long time before he folded it with slow precision. "Interesting," he murmured. His bastard son Ramsay stood behind him, sharpening a knife as usual. "What's interesting?" Ramsay asked, barely looking up. "The Stark boy has made a move," Roose replied calmly. "A desperate one. He has tied his sister's fate to his own. It makes her harder to use." Ramsay smirked. "We'll just break the tie then." Roose shot him a silent warning glance. Ramsay fell quiet, but the grin never left his face. War had a way of turning even family into political weapons, and Roose Bolton had never been one to ignore opportunity. Robb's declaration, as protective as it was meant to be, also painted Sansa Stark as a symbol stronger than any crown. Symbols attract daggers. As the North simmered with tension, Robb prepared his army for the march toward the Twins, unaware that every move he made was being watched by eyes that saw advantage in every crack of his leadership. That night, Robb sat by the fire, his dire-wolf gray wind lying beside him like a living shadow. The flames made Robb's face look older, carved by worry and burden. The camp around him was quiet, but his mind was not. Catelyn joined him. Wrapped in a thick cloak, her expression tired but warm. "The men are uneasy," she said gently. "They have reason to be. You gave them direction today. Even if they don't understand the full meaning of your decision, they understand you did it to protect Sansa. Robb stared into the fire. Do you think father would have done it? Catelyn hesitated. Your father believed in honor more than life itself, but he also believed in protecting family above all. So yes, if it came to saving his children, he might have made choices he hated. Robb nodded slowly. Catelyn's voice softened. Sansa will one day know that you sacrificed your name to protect hers. Robb didn't answer. He didn't feel like a hero. He felt like a man walking through a storm without a map, hoping the next step wouldn't lead to a cliff. But far away in the Red Keep, Sansa stood on her balcony, staring northward, unaware of the message already racing toward King's Landing. A message that would ignite chaos, anger, fear, and dangerous plans. A message that read, Sansa Stark is bound by pact to the king in the north. Any attempt to claim her is an act of war. And by the time the Lannisters read those words, it would already be too late to undo the storm they were about to unleash. When the Raven finally arrived in King's Landing, it was early morning, and the sky was still painted in soft gray. The guards at the Red Keep barely glanced at the black-feathered bird until it began screeching, its claws banging against the window of the small council chamber. Pycelle grumbled, shuffled to the window, and unrolled the parchment with shaking hands. The moment he read the first line, his eyes went wide. This is madness, he whispered. Cersei, who had been half listening to the council squabble over grain and debts, snapped her head up. What now? Pycelle swallowed hard. It is a declaration. From the north. Tywin Lannister raised his eyes slowly, like a man who had already predicted trouble, but hoped for one peaceful morning. Read it. Pycelle cleared his throat and read aloud. Sansa Stark is bound by pact to King Robb Stark of the North. No lord, king, or house may claim her without inviting war against the North and its allies. Silence. Then, like wildfire meeting dry wood, the room exploded. What idiocy is this? Cersei hissed, snatching the letter. Her eyes scanned the words quickly. With every line she read, her face grew tighter, colder, angrier. To bind her to him, she growled. To his own brother? Disgusting! Tywin's voice cut through the room like a sword. It is not a marriage. Then what is it? Cersei snapped. A shield, Tywin answered calmly. A statement. The boy is not claiming her as a wife. He is claiming her future, her political worth. With this pact, Robb makes her untouchable for any Southern alliance. Littlefinger leaned forward with a glint in his eye that made Sansa's stomach twist. Untouchable is a strong word, my lord. No one is untouchable in King's Landing. Tywin ignored him. The Stark boy grows more desperate, but he has teeth. This is clever. Cersei crumpled the letter in her fist. He is using her against us. Again. Tywin corrected her. No, he is keeping us from using her. Then he added, and that makes her dangerous. Sansa, who was standing quietly by the door waiting to be dismissed from her embroidery lessons, felt the entire world tilt beneath her feet. She had not known about any pact. She had not asked for this. She didn't even understand what it meant. All eyes slowly turned to her. For the first time, Sansa felt like more than a frightened girl. She felt like a symbol, a spark, a threat. Cersei walked toward her with slow steps. Your brother thinks he can challenge the crown through you, that he can hide behind your name. She leaned in, her voice sharp as poison. Tell me, Sansa, did you know he would do this? No, your grace, Sansa whispered. I didn't. Cersei stared so deeply into her eyes that Sansa felt stripped bare. Then to Sansa's shock, Cersei smiled. But it wasn't relief. It was a smile of someone who had found a reason to retaliate. We must consider our next move, Tywin said, rising. The North believes they are protecting their girl. Let us show them how fragile protection truly is. Sansa felt cold. Meanwhile, hundreds of miles away, the North was in turmoil. Some houses celebrated Robb's declaration, seeing it as a powerful message to the South. Others feared it was the last straw, the moment when the Lannisters would push back with full force. The Freys were particularly insulted. It felt like Robb had spat directly on their family after already breaking one marriage arrangement. Whispers grew in their halls, whispers that smelled of bitterness and revenge. Walder Frey slammed his cup so hard on the table that wine splashed across his sons. "The boy thinks he can insult me twice?" he screeched. "Twice! He binds himself to his own sister and calls it politics. I should have skinned that wolf's pelt when I had the chance." But the most dangerous reaction came from the Boltons. Rose Bolton sat alone in his hall, rereading the Declaration under the dim candlelight. His expression didn't change, but the cold amusement in his eyes grew sharper. "Robb Stark is weakening himself," he murmured. "A king who shows desperation invites knives." He folded the letter and slipped it inside his cloak. "He has given us the perfect opportunity." That same night, Robb gathered his closest men. The Freys had demanded he approach the twins and apologize for his past insult before further crossing. Robb didn't trust them, not one bit, but he needed their bridge, their alliance, and Freys loved when someone begged. Robb stared at the campfire, the flames reflecting in his tired eyes. He knew he was walking into the mouth of danger, but the war had stripped him of choices. "We move at dawn," he said. Catelyn felt her heart drop. "Robb, the Freys will not forgive easily." "They don't need to forgive," Robb replied. "They only need to keep their daggers hidden long enough for us to cross." But as he said it, even he didn't believe it. The night felt too quiet. The air felt wrong. Gray wind paced uneasily, growling at shadows. And in King's Landing, Sansa Stark sat alone in her room, gripping the edge of her bed, whispering a prayer she hadn't spoken since she was a child. "Please, let him be safe." She didn't know it, but her brother's single, desperate act, meant to protect her, had already placed them both in mortal danger. The march toward the twins felt heavier than any journey Robb had taken before. Each mile seemed to carry a warning. Gray wind growled constantly, pacing around the camp, snapping at shadows that weren't there. Even the air felt tense, as if the very land remembered every insult, every slight, every broken promise between House Stark and House Frey. Robb tried to ignore the feeling twisting inside his chest, but he couldn't. The symbolic pact with Sansa had been a shield meant to protect her, yet he could sense that it had become a crack in the fragile alliances holding the North together. A message meant to show strength was now being twisted into weakness, and he knew exactly who would take advantage of that perception. Walder Frey. The Riverlands were damp and cold when Robb and his men finally reached the twins. Two towers, tall and miserable, stared down at them like eyes filled with old insults and older grudges. Robb dismounted, hands clenched, heart heavy. He could not afford pride now. He could not afford anger. Every man beside him knew it too. The Freys greeted them with stiff smiles that didn't touch their eyes. Walder Frey himself stood inside the hall, hunched over his chair like a spider waiting for a fly. His thin lips curled as Robb approached. "Well, well, the young wolf returns," Walder croaked. "And with such, interesting news from the north." Robb forced his expression to remain calm. "Lord Frey, I have come to speak of alliances." Walder chuckled, the sound sharp and mocking. "Alliances? Oh, you know so much about alliances, don't you, boy? First you break one, then you insult my house, then you bind yourself to your own sister." Robb stiffened. "It was not a marriage." Walder's eyes sparkled with cruel amusement. "Call it what you will. The realm whispers, and I hear everything." Catelyn stepped forward. "Lord Frey, the pact is symbolic, a protective measure. There is nothing improper." Walder cut her off. "Improper? Oh no, Lady Stark. I don't care what you northern folk do with your bloodlines. What I care about is respect." He leaned back in his chair, staring at Robb with open arrogance. "And I think you owe my house a very large debt." Robb swallowed the anger rising in him. "I am willing to repair what was broken." "Oh?" Walder jeered. "And what will you give me? Another apology? Another promise? Another insult wrapped in honor?" The room felt hotter with every word. Robb's men shifted uneasily. Catelyn sensed the danger growing, but before she could speak, Walder raised a hand. "You may cross," he said at last. "I am not a man without mercy. We will have a feast tonight to mend what has been torn." Something in his tone made Robb's stomach twist, but he nodded, knowing he had no choice. The preparations for the feast began quickly, and the phrase acted polite, far too polite. They offered wine, bread, musicians, warm fires. It felt like a stage set for something that didn't belong to the world of hospitality. Catelyn watched every detail with a growing sense of dread. She saw the Frey women avoiding eye contact. She saw soldiers whispering behind pillars. She saw how quickly the wine was being poured, how the musicians avoided cheerful songs, how the guards positioned themselves near every exit. She leaned toward Robb. "Something is wrong." Robb nodded slowly. "I know." But it was already too late to walk away. Meanwhile, back in King's Landing, the storm created by Robb's declaration had grown more dangerous. Tywin Lannister held a private meeting with Cersei and Littlefinger. Maps of the North were spread on the table. Lines of attack, supply routes, strongholds, all marked. Tywin traced a finger along the route from the Twins to Riverrun. Robb Stark is walking into a trap without knowing it. The Freys feel dishonored. The Boltons feel overlooked. And the boy just weakened himself politically with that ridiculous pact. Cersei smirked, then let him fall. Littlefinger spoke softly, almost too softly. "Sansa will need guidance when her brother dies." Cersei's eyes narrowed. "She is not yours." Littlefinger smiled. "Everyone becomes mine eventually." Tywin ignored both of them. "When Robb Stark dies, and he will die, the North will fracture. But the real question is what we do with the girl." Cersei looked pleased. "She is the key to Winterfell." Tywin corrected her. Cold, precise, deadly. "She is the key to breaking the North entirely." And Sansa, sitting alone in her chamber, clutching the letter she hadn't been allowed to keep, felt dread settle into her bones. She had no idea what the Lannisters were planning, but she knew one thing with absolute certainty. Her brother was in danger. Back at the Twins, the feast began. Music swelled, wine flowed, and laughter echoed through the hall. But every sound felt wrong. Too loud, too forced, too hollow. Robb sat at the high table, stiff, distracted, watching everything with the eyes of a king who sensed wolves circling in the dark. Catelyn leaned closer. "Robb, gray wind. He's trapped outside." Robb frowned. "They said it was for safety." "No," Catelyn whispered. "Not safety, separation." And at that same moment across the hall, the main doors closed with a heavy, echoing thud. The first sign, the first warning, the first drop of blood in the water. Robb felt a chill run down his spine. Something terrible was coming, something they could not escape. The hall grew quieter, though no one acknowledged it. The music continued, but now it sounded strained, as if the musicians' fingers trembled on the strings. The torches flickered along the walls, casting long shadows that danced behind the Frey guards, who had started to gather in corners they hadn't been standing in before. Robb noticed everything. He noticed the way the Freys weren't drinking their own wine. He noticed how the laughter died too quickly. He noticed how every exit was now flanked by men he didn't recognize. But the worst sign of all was how the Freys stared at him, not with annoyance, not with resentment, but with hungry satisfaction. The look of men who believed themselves moments away from victory. Catelyn reached for her goblet, then paused. Her fingers hovered over the rim, sensing something familiar. Something she had only experienced once before. Tension before bloodshed. Her eyes swept the hall again, and the feeling in her stomach hardened into certainty. "Robb," she whispered urgently, "do not drink." He lowered the goblet immediately. Across the room, Walder Frey raised his cup with a smile that didn't touch his eyes. He began to speak. "Tonight," Walder said, "we put aside old grievances." Catelyn's heartbeat quickened. "Tonight we welcome the king in the north back into our hall." A murmur of false cheer rose. "Tonight we drink to new beginnings." Robb stared at him, unmoving. But Catelyn wasn't looking at Walder anymore. She was staring at the musicians, specifically the way they exchanged glances, the way the melody shifted, warping into something haunting. Something she recognized instantly. Her breath caught in her throat. "Robb," she whispered, voice trembling. "That song." Robb turned his head slightly. "What is it?" "The Rains of Castamere." The Lannister's song, a song of slaughter, a song of extermination. Her blood turned cold. Robb rose halfway out of his seat, just as one of the Frey men stepped forward behind a bannerman who had fought beside Robb since the first battle. The Frey guard's hand moved to his crossbow. Catelyn reacted before thought, before breath, before fear. "Robb, get down!" Her scream cut through the hall. Too late. The first arrow flew. It struck one of Robb's men in the throat. He collapsed, choking on blood, as the hall erupted. Frey soldiers pulled hidden weapons. Crossbows were raised from the balconies. Servants dropped their trays and drew knives. Music turned into chaos. Robb barely had time to grab his sword. Catelyn lunged toward him, shoving him down behind the table, just as bolts rained down like a cruel storm. Men screamed, chairs overturned, wine spilled like blood. Robb tried to stand, but another arrow grazed his shoulder, slicing through cloth and skin. "Mother! Stay down!" Catelyn cried, but Robb was already pushing himself up, fury blazing in his eyes. All around him, northern men were being cut down, slaughtered in their seats before they could even draw steel. Gray wind howled outside, throwing himself against the locked gate, sensing his master's danger, his rage echoing through the night. Inside, Robb cut down a Frey soldier who charged him, but two more stepped forward. Catelyn grabbed a fallen dagger and attacked another man, slashing wildly to reach her son's side. "Traitors!" Robb roared, fighting his way toward the nearest exit. Every direction was blocked, every escape was trapped, and above it all, Walder Frey watched with delighted amusement. When Robb looked up at him, face smeared with blood, eyes filled with betrayal, Walder only shrugged. "You should have honored your promises," the old man said smugly. An explosion of pain tore through Robb's side as another bolt struck him. He staggered, nearly falling. Catelyn rushed to his aid, grabbing him before he could collapse. "Robb, stay with me!" He gritted his teeth, forcing himself to stay upright. But blood soaked his tunic, dripping down his arm. His breath came fast and shallow. He could feel the world slipping. He could feel the trap closing. And in King's Landing, far away from the blood and screams, Sansa Stark woke from a nightmare. Heart pounding, hands shaking, tears streaking her cheeks, without knowing why. But somewhere in her chest, she felt something break. Back in the hall, Robb stumbled, surrounded by enemies. Grey Wind's distant howls turned frantic, desperate, matching the sound of northern men dying one by one. Catelyn grabbed Robb's face, forcing his eyes to meet hers. "We cannot die here," she whispered. But Robb, breathing hard, staring at the blood on his hands, understood something neither of them wanted to accept. This wasn't a battle. It was an execution. Robb fought harder than he had in any battle before. But battles had rules. This massacre had none. The Freys attacked like butchers, not soldiers. They had come for slaughter, not honor. Their blades were aimed at unarmed guests, at wounded men, at backs turned in trust. It was a betrayal written before the feast began, and even now Robb could taste the bitterness of it between each breath. Catelyn pulled Robb behind an overturned table as a rain of crossbow bolts shattered the wood above. The hall was drowning in screams. Northern men lay dying on the floor, the blood pooling beneath them like dark rivers. The smell of iron filled the air, thick and suffocating. Robb pressed a hand against his wounded side, blood seeping through his fingers. Pain shot up into his ribs, but he refused to fall. He refused to give the Freys the satisfaction. "Mother!" he gasped. "We have to reach the door," Catelyn said, her voice trembling but fierce. "We are not dying here, Robb. We are not." A Frey soldier lunged at them with a spear. Robb pushed himself up and met the blow with his sword, the clash ringing through the hall. The impact sent another wave of pain through him, but he gritted his teeth, refusing to yield. He parried, then drove the blade through the man's chest. Catelyn stabbed another attacker in the leg, causing him to fall screaming. She grabbed Robb's arm, pulling him forward, but every step felt heavier. Robb could feel warmth dripping down his back. Blood. Too much blood. The room spun slightly as he moved. He blinked hard, trying to clear his vision. "Robb, keep going!" Catelyn cried, dragging him through the chaos. All around them, northern men were falling. Men who had followed Robb into battle. Men who believed in him. Men who deserved better than this treachery. Robb's chest tightened at the sight of Black Walder cutting down a Stark bannerman who had fought beside Robb since his first victory. They didn't even give him the honor of a clean death. They mocked him as they killed him. Rage flared in Robb's chest. A booming crash echoed through the hall, the main doors being barred shut from the outside. Behind them, gray winds snarling and banging grew louder, more desperate. The direwolf threw himself against the wood with all his strength, but the Freys had reinforced it with chains and bolts. Robb clenched his jaw. He could feel his friend's panic, his fury, his pain. The bond between a Stark and his direwolf was something the Freys would never understand, and Robb felt it tearing through him like a second wound. "We have to get to the side entrance," Catelyn said urgently. Robb nodded, forcing himself forward, every breath burning. But then, another wave of Frey soldiers surged from the left side of the hall, blocking the path. Robb raised his sword again, but his arm shook slightly. Catelyn stood protectively beside him, dagger ready, but she knew this couldn't last. "We can't fight them all," she whispered. "No," Robb said, voice rough. "But we can kill enough to make them fear we tried." The Freys closed in. Then the doors to the balcony above swung open, and dozens of crossbowmen stepped into view. Catelyn's stomach dropped. "No," she breathed. Robb looked up, his eyes full of fire and defiance. The defiance of a king who would not kneel, even in death. Walder Frey raised his hand. "Loose!" Arrows rained from above. Robb shoved Catelyn behind him, taking the brunt of the first volley. Bolts struck the table, the ground, and Robb's back. He staggered forward, falling to one knee, breath knocked out of him. Blood poured down his tunic, staining the floor beneath him. "Robb!" Catelyn screamed, scrambling to him. Robb's breath trembled. His strength was fading fast. The world around him blurred. His sword slipped from his fingers, clattering against the stone. Catelyn grabbed him, her hands shaking violently. "Robb, stay with me! Look at me!" He tried to lift his head. He tried to speak. But his body felt heavy, too heavy, like he was sinking into the ground. The Freys circled them slowly, savoring the moment. Black Walder stepped forward with a grin full of cruelty. Catelyn turned, fury blazing in her eyes. "You coward! You treacherous dog!" Walder Frey's voice echoed across the hall. "The North forgot its manners. We merely remind them." Robb coughed, blood staining his lips. His vision flickered. He could hear Grey Wind outside, the desperate, maddened howls of a beast who could feel his master dying. In King's Landing at that same moment, Sansa gasped awake again, clutching her chest, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know why she couldn't breathe, only that something was very, very wrong. Back at the Twins, Catelyn wrapped her arms around Robb, shielding him with her own body as another wave of Frey soldiers approached. "You will not take him from me," she snarled. But the Freys only smiled. This was what they wanted. This was what they had planned. Robb fought to lift his head, eyes filled with grief, fury, and a terrible realization. He would not survive this. But there was still one more twist of fate waiting in the hall. One final moment before the last blow. And the North story wasn't finished yet. Not by Frey hands, not by Lannister gold, and not by treachery alone. The hall held its breath. The knives were ready, and the young wolf's fate was about to be sealed. The hall was almost silent now, not because the killing had stopped, but because nearly every northern voice had already been silenced. Only the crackle of torches and the groans of dying men remained. The rains of Castamere played softly, cruelly, as if mocking every last breath. Robb Stark lay in his mother's arms, barely conscious, his blood pooling onto the stone floor. His breath came in shallow gasps. His skin had turned pale. But even now, even half dead, he tried to reach for his sword, the sword that had slipped from his fingers minutes earlier. Catelyn held him tightly, her own clothes soaked with his blood. Her hands shook uncontrollably. Her eyes were wide, wild, filled with a grief so deep it barely felt human anymore. "Robb, look at me," she whispered, brushing the hair from his face. "Please, my son, stay with me." Robb tried. Gods, he tried. His eyes fluttered open for a moment. He looked at her, truly looked, and something in his gaze broke her heart completely. "I'm sorry," he breathed weakly. "No," Catelyn whispered, her voice cracking. "No, you did everything right. You fought for our family. You fought for the North. This," her voice trembled, "this is not your fault." Robb swallowed, trying to form words. "Sansa," Catelyn leaned closer. "She is alive. She is waiting for you. Robb, you must hold on." He tried to nod, but even that seemed to exhaust him. His hand slipped from hers. Across the hall, Walder Frey stood from his chair. "Well," Walder croaked, "that was easier than I expected." Catelyn's head snapped toward him, her expression twisting into something fierce and heartbreaking. She rose slowly, pulling Robb with her, shielding him even as he could barely hold his own weight. "You promised us bread and salt," she said, her voice trembling with fury. "You promised us safety." Walder shrugged. "I promised you nothing. You broke vows first, boy king." He sneered at Robb. "And now you pay." Catelyn grabbed the nearest Frey by the hair and pressed a knife to his throat, her hands shaking but determined. "Let my son go," she said, voice breaking, "or I swear to the gods I will cut his throat." Walder raised an eyebrow. "Go on then. Kill him. One less idiot in my family." The cruel simplicity of the words destroyed her. Catelyn's arm dropped. The knife fell from her hand. She stared at Walder with empty eyes. The eyes of a mother watching her world die. Robb swayed beside her, barely standing, his body giving out. He reached for her weakly. "Mother." The word came out soft, fragile, almost childlike. And then, from behind them, a shadow approached. Roose Bolton. His boots were silent on the floor. His expression was blank, cold. His blade dripped with the blood of northern men he had cut down moments earlier. He stepped toward Robb. Catelyn gasped, "Roose! Roose, please!" But Roose Bolton had no mercy left in him. Not for Robb, not for the North, not for anyone. "The Lannisters send their regard," he said softly. His knife plunged into Robb's heart. Robb's body jerked, a soft gasp escaping him. Then he fell into his mother's arms, lifeless. Catelyn screamed. It was a sound that echoed with every loss she had ever suffered. Ned, Bran, Rickon, Sansa, Arya, and now Robb. Her voice tore through the hall, raw and animal, a mother's grief breaking every wall around her. But the Freys did not care. Walder nodded to his men. A blade flashed. And Catelyn Stark fell beside her son. The hall grew silent. The massacre was complete. Outside the twins, Grey Wind sensed the moment Robb's heart stopped. His howls turned into something hollow, something painful, the cry of a creature losing its soul. Dozens of Frey men tried to hold him back, but he tore through them in rage, killing many before they finally brought him down. The direwolf died surrounded by enemies, his fur soaked in red, his eyes dimming with the same sorrow that had taken his master. The young wolf and his wolf fell on the same night. Word traveled fast across the realm. In the north, men wept openly. Some refused to believe it. Some swore vengeance. Some fell to their knees, feeling hope die in their chests. In the Dreadfort, Roose Bolton became Warden of the North. In the Twins, Walder Frey celebrated with arrogance and wine, thinking himself invincible. In King's Landing, Tywin Lannister smiled faintly when the Raven arrived. Cersei felt only satisfaction. Littlefinger hid his delight beneath a mask of concern. But Sansa collapsed the moment she heard the news. She sobbed until she couldn't breathe. She trembled until she couldn't stand. She held on to the memory of her brother. The brother who had tried to save her, who had protected her even in his final days, who died because he carried the weight of the North and the pain of his family. Her tears stained her sleeves. Her heart broke quietly. She whispered his name into the darkness. Robb. And far beyond the walls of King's Landing, in the cold winds that blew across the north, the wolves howled. Not in victory, not in strength, but in mourning. Because the North had lost its king, and the world had lost the last hope of the Stark rebellion.